So Linda Tai is a trauma therapist. She's a storyteller, educator, yoga instructor, and former child refugee. She's highly sought after for her trainings about adult children of refugees, trauma and the body, and compassion, fatigue, resilience, and vicarious trauma recovery skills for human services professionals. As an adjunct faculty member in the social work department at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Linda's decolonized approach to education and an engaging teaching style makes her well loved with students. She has also assisted Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and Alicia Skye. So Dr. Bessel van der Kolk is the president of the Trauma Research Foundation, and Alicia Skye, who's the CEO of TRF. And she's assisted them in private small group psychotherapy workshops aimed at healing attachment trauma. So thank you so much, Linda, for being here and being such a crucial part of the TRF community. Take it away.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who said hi in the chat box. I see so many familiar names and my heart just lights up to know that I exist in community with you all. And so in service of me landing into my body with you, I'm going to say a few words in the language of my ancestors. Chào bạn. Tôi tên là Thái Kim Ngọc. Cha tôi tên là Thái Văn Nam. Mẹ tôi tên là Dương Thu Hà. Gia đình tôi đến từ vùng Sóc Trăng, Việt Nam. Tôi rất vui và hân hạnh có được cơ hội chia sẻ câu chuyện của tôi cùng các bạn. You know, in my personal and professional journey of moving through trauma, what I have discovered is that you can't do trauma without doing grief. Yeah, you can't do trauma without doing grief. And grief, like trauma, is stored in the body. And so grief grips the body in many, many ways. The numbness and the disorientation of shock, the body armouring of frozen love and loss, and the collapse of despair, the futility of resentment, paralysis and regrets, and this piercing stridency towards making sense of it all. And I find myself so very fortunate. You know, I was born in Vietnam and raised in Australia, and these days I live and work on the stolen lands of the Tanana Athabascan peoples of interior Alaska. And Edward T. Hall is a cross-cultural anthropologist who consulted for the CIA during the Cold War, and he said something that has just stuck with me all these years. He said, when you go to another country, you're not getting to know the host culture, you're actually getting to know your culture of origin. And so speaking for myself, growing up in Australia, I never felt quite Vietnamese enough. And at the same time, I never felt quite Australian enough. And once I discovered Alaska and the vast expansiveness of the awe and the wonder and the magic of this place, I was able to land in my body, and I was able to then move through aspects of my identity that were hidden from myself while I was living in Australia. I actually got to reckon with how Australian I am and how Vietnamese I am. And as I move through my own journey with all new awarenesses comes grief. And yet here we are living in a grief-phobic society. Right, the overwhelming desire to numb in order to avoid all the feelings that can express as denial, dissociation or escapism, with and without the use of addictions and compulsive behaviours. And that too was also a part of my journey. We have this access to amnesia and anaesthesia, in the words of Jungian psychotherapist and grief expert Francis Weller. And so this inability to mourn for all of these reasons prevented me from fully returning to the land of risking loving once more. I believe it was Rumi who said that fear is the cheapest room in the inn, and you deserve to live in better lodgings. And so part of trauma recovery and grief recovery is entering into the dignity of risk, the dignity of risking loving once more, and drinking from the nectar of beauty and purposefulness and aliveness. And so in this world of trauma recovery, when we talk about grief, it's the grief for our ability to now recognise what was lost or taken or given away in order for us to survive. And today, I can now grieve for what I didn't get. And the impact of the missing experiences, the impact of what I didn't get upon my inner landscape and on my life course trajectory. Trauma is what happened that shouldn't have happened, and trauma is also what didn't happen that should have happened. So there's grief involved. And yet we also know that in under-resourced families, what happens is the family isn't able to hold space for the grief of a child. Parents who have unresolved traumas and losses aren't able to be there for their children in the ways in which are developmentally appropriate. And so my parents, with their refugee journey that I was on with them, which was highly traumatic, and then life in a new country where we're living hand to mouth each day and scraping by as best as we can while dealing with homesickness and survivor guilt, they weren't able to attune to me and to my sister in the ways in which we needed. They, in their inability to grieve due to the resources they didn't have, meant that they weren't able to hold space for our grief. And so all of this is to say, as we move through the next 6 weeks together, I invite a holding of oneself with tenderness and with gentleness, and also with curiosity. To allow whatever is emergent in these practices for you to be held with this tenderness and this containment. And so today, I'm going to share with you a practice that I believe speaks into aspects of collective loss. You see, in the vast realm of grief, when I was doing my own grief exploration and journey, grief was very much focused on individual losses. Something I had and it's no longer there, and I don't mean in any way to demean our very significant individual losses. And yet there was this bigger landscape of collective trauma and collective grief and collective loss that was missing in the public discourse. And we know that with collective loss, the loss of the collective, culture, ancestors, ecosystems, these two need to be named so that they can be mourned. And when we look at these aspects of belonging, to be with a longing, to be with others, we then start to recognise that secure attachment, belonging, from a decolonised perspective, is secure attachment to land and to nature and pets and plants and the seasons and the shifting of days and months and the rhythms of time. And so it's secure attachment to time and to my place amongst things. It's secure attachment to ancestors and to descendants and to myself in amongst a lineage, becoming the ancestor I would like to become. And embedded within that is secure attachment to culture, to language, to food, to traditions, to movement, to dance, to rhythms, to songs and story, and silence. And secure attachment to my body and to bodies. And to pause and to take in the vastness of this, the four-dimensionality of this, is what the practice that I share with you, I hope, can land into this place. And so before we enter into this practice, I want to acknowledge that this somatic practice for remembering and re-embering was shared to me by Kai Cheng Tom. And she learned this practice from the Strozzi Institute and I'm sorry, I can't say the word, the Generative Somatics Institute. And both these institutes acknowledge that their practices are derived from Ayurveda, Aikido, and traditional Chinese medicine. So please know that all the practices that I offer are invitational, and you're welcome to pause anywhere where it feels appropriate to pause and be with this sense of community if it doesn't feel appropriate for you to engage in the practice yourself. So I'm going to take a few breaths here, and I invite you to do the same if that feels okay with you, and to perhaps attend to any constriction that's in your body in ways that may feel appropriate for you in this moment. Yeah. Now this practice you can do seated. You're also welcome to do this standing if that feels more appropriate for you. Yeah. So if you like, you can begin with your hands somewhere at torso center. And if you like, we can expand arms outwards, exploring the horizontal plane. And as you begin to explore this horizontal plane, if it feels okay with you, I invite you to invite into this spaciousness your communities. Perhaps work communities, perhaps family, perhaps neighbourhoods, perhaps shared activities, folks with whom you feel a sense of meaningful purpose, meaningful relationships, meaningful connection, a sense of belonging. And maybe perhaps, if you like, you can pause with arms extended out. And if it feels okay with you, I invite you to turn your head from side to side to take in the folks who stand alongside you in community. The folks who've got your back and you've got theirs. And if we were together in person, I'd actually have us standing with consent, yeah? Hands on each other's shoulders or middle of each other's backs. A pause to take in the fullness of our communities. And then if it feels okay with you to gather the sense of camaraderie in these communities, to bring that energy in towards torso center, to allow that energy to land. Perhaps a sense of renewal, perhaps a sense of re-embering. And you can return once again, if it feels okay with you, this sense of self as part of a collective, a we and a me. And as Dan Siegel calls it, a sense of moi, a sense of mois. And then if it feels okay with you, I invite you to pause back here at torso center and we'll explore together the vertical plane. A larger sense of collective and connection between the earth and the sky. And if you like, you may wish to reach down towards the earth and to reach up towards the sky. Engaging in movements that feel appropriate for you. And as you reach down to the earth, the realm of earthworm and grass and mud and tundra and stream, sand and riverbed, through the world of mountains, trees, forests, glaciers, icebergs, up towards clouds and rainbows, aurora, sun and moon and stars and cosmos. And once again, back down to the earth, knowing that it is okay to pause anywhere where it may feel appropriate for you to pause. And to be with whatever emerges for you. And I'm going to reach down once again and gather the water of the rice paddies. Bring it up through torso center. And to offer this up to the monsoon rains. And whatever is emergent for you is welcome in this moment. And then if you like, we can explore together the horizontal plane. This is the reaching forward and the reaching back. Maybe perhaps with a little bit of cat and cow in the spine, and perhaps not. Yeah. And if you like, if it feels appropriate for you, as you reach forward, those who have yet to come, and as you reach back, those from whom I am arrived. And if it feels appropriate for you, maybe perhaps you would like to reach with one arm forward and one arm back. And the hands come together here at torso center, the present moment, in the here and now in this body. And then reaching forward and back in the other direction. And as you switch sides, I invite a pause if it feels okay with you. To look back. To acknowledge your ancestors. Bloodline ancestors as well as professional lineages. The communities of the communities that have nourished your people, however you define your people, spiritual ancestors. The teachers of your teachers of your teachers. It could be activist ancestors. And then we'll switch sides. And looking back, we acknowledge the gifts, the heirlooms. And we also acknowledge the legacy burdens. In the words of IFS and Richard Schwartz. We acknowledge that which was given that shouldn't have been given, and that which was taken from us that shouldn't have been taken. And we acknowledge, as we switch sides once again, that I can choose. And as we look forward, I can choose what I wish to pass on, what it is that will pass through me. We talk about intergenerational trauma. Can we talk about, please, intergenerational resilience? We switch sides once again. And as we look forward, to connect to the hand that's reaching back, the strength, the resources that allow me to pass it forward. To bring back hands to torso center, knowing that who I am is more than enough. And as I reconnect back to the horizontal plane, the lateral, the sideways, the community, the moi, the mois, that we can take turns stepping forward and in. That I don't need to always be the one giving. I can also tend to myself and allow myself to be tended to. And when it feels appropriate for me, when the remembering has become re-embering, I can offer back into the world in whichever ways feel appropriate for me. Thank you, friends. I'm going to invite in a space of pause. And in this space of pause, I'm going to invite you to look out the window and to orient to the horizon. To look for your exits and the route between you and your exits. To notice the space that you're in, as well as the space above you and in front of you and below you. And to know that wherever it is that you land, is meant to be. So I'm going to invite now a formal conclusion to the practice and to invite in any questions or comments that you may have. And if you have them, you're welcome to drop them into the chat box, into the Q&A. So as the thank yous come in, I'd like to offer something into the space. And I learned about this from one of my elders, Gus Kaufman. He said to me that there is chronos and then there is kairos. Chronos is clock time and kairos is soul time. And so for some of us, these practices they are powerful, and if it is kairos, if it is soul time, then the fruit is ripe and it's low hanging and grief may come forth. Yeah. And for others of us, there may be alternative responses to the practice, and it's okay.
This is a pretty big question, so we'll see what you think here. Someone's saying that the timing of this is perfect, but their question is, how do we forgive? And that's sort of a very open-ended question.
Yes. My lived experience, and you all have your own, is that forgiveness is a byproduct of the process of grief. And we can only grieve that which is within our circle of worthiness. And you, and what you have lived through, and what you have experienced, I hope one day can be contained within your circle of worthiness. Grief is powerful. It's a surrender into a liminal space. And the byproduct of that is an expanded capacity, because there's an expanded perspective. And I believe that in our linearity, we want to get somewhere in a straight line as fast as possible. And it's a process. And the prize is in the process, because there is then a reclamation. So much of grief and loss is actually ambiguous. Something that I didn't get that was my birthright. Something that I didn't get and in the not getting of it, I feel bereft of an unnameable something, and the not getting of it has left an imprint or a lack of an imprint on my interiority.
A question here is, I had a feeling of someone pulling me forward while something was trying to keep holding me onto my hands from behind me. Is there a significance to this, do you think, during the practice?
Yes. This is where so this is getting into somatics, yeah? That there's resource and then there's constriction, yeah? And when we land on resource, we savor that. And then when we notice constriction, because trauma is constriction, yeah, it's tension, it's tightness, yeah. When we have resource, we can move towards constriction with discernment. And this capacity for discernment allows us to pause and stay with something that's uncomfortable, and to discern between, am I unsafe or am I uncomfortable? Maybe, perhaps, this that is being experienced in the body is a somatic wisdom that's emerging. Yeah. And so I know that in somatic practices, and I'm one of these people, I talk about the window of capacity and upregulation and downregulation, and yet when we can land on a resource that allows us to move towards activation with discernment, we can then pause and be curious about what messages are emergent in this moment. And it's this emergence and trusting in the emergence that is trusting in resource, because resource is primary. Trauma is secondary. It disconnects us from resource. This capacity to begin to trust in emergence is trusting in the natural unfolding of oneself and one's life. Yeah. And so we do that in baby steps, sip, sip, yeah, in ways that can then become integrated. And so that's why I say that it is totally okay to pause if this does not resonate with you. Pause if there are messages coming from your body that there's constriction and I need some more resource because I'm not able to sit with that constriction with discernment. Yeah? And my body is giving me those signals and those cues, and that is perfectly okay. Yeah, we'll cover some territory over the next 6 weeks. And so, take what works for you and leave the rest for now.
One more good question here, if you have the time for it. So I notice some resistance when the practice starts. I start fidgeting, picking my fingers, but I want to participate. Like, what are some things I can do to put myself in the moment to participate?
Yes. So this is where, and this is what I've learned from working with myself as well as with folks for whom some of these practices are a bit much, is that when we expand laterally, we can just do this, or we can keep one hand to protect or to center or to ground, and the other hand may extend out. Maybe a little bit of this and then coming back in. Same with the horizontal, same with the vertical plane. Right, you can do this and explore this way, right, with the torso, with the rocking. You can keep hands here while you twist from side to side. This may not be relevant to this person, however, it may be relevant to the group. What trauma does is it keeps us in a very small frame, and we lose the capacity. We operate in the sagittal plane if we get into the somatics of movement. It's like we're walking down a corridor and we lose capacity to notice our expanded field of vision. It's like we operate with blinders on. And so we live in the sagittal plane, and we lose this capacity for the transverse plane, and we lose capacity for the frontal plane. I know that in Bessel's conference last year, he had a presenter that talked about trauma being a disconnection from your peripersonal space. And so some of these practices where we're actually taking up space in the world can actually elicit some responses in our body, that may be signaling to us, there's been an overcoupling of unsafety or danger with taking up space. In which case we titrate down, we take little movements. Bye everyone.